Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Teresa Borges, and I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Columbia Global Centers in Rio. This is a global initiative of the Columbia Global Centers together with Studio X in Amman. We are here, this has been a collaborative work between CGC Rio and CGC Istanbul, as well as CGC Amman, and it's very exciting that we have an international group of panelists and experts that will share with you their insights from a global perspective on our theme today. So this initiative, it's called Network-Wide Events from the Columbia Global Centers, and the idea is to have a global audience speaking and interacting and exchanging information on a given theme. So I wish you all a wonderful webinar. I thank all the participants as well as all of you in the audience, and I'm at your disposal for further questions. Now I'll refer to Merve, my colleague in Istanbul. I'm locally now based in Rio, so it's very warm today. I know that other panelists are expecting freezing snowstorms today, so this shows a little bit of how global we go. So Merve, thank you for hosting, and thank you everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Teresa. Hello. I would like to say a warm welcome to everyone. My name is Merve Ispahani. I'm the Academic Programs Coordinator at Columbia Global Centers Istanbul. Today, we're delighted to be presenting a timely conversation on the pandemic and reshaping the urban landscape, hyperlocalization, and 15-minute cities. The COVID-19 pandemic deepened existing inequalities on global scale. The virus exposed and widened the gap between the haves and have-nots, both within and between countries. The contrast is rather clear in cities. The impact of the pandemic reinforced the ongoing trend towards the suburbanization of inequality, while at the same time changed our relationship with our urban landscapes. Cities around the world now work towards COVID-19 recovery and explore new ways for building more resilient urban centers for future crises. Our webinar series on emergency urbanism and today's discussion on hyperlocalization and 15-minute cities seeks to contribute to this ongoing global conversation with a group of distinguished scholars. Let me briefly introduce them to you. Hayrettin Günç is a program manager at NACTO, Global Design Cities Initiative, and contributes NACTO's efforts in promoting safe, equitable, and sustainable cities through better street design. He is an architect and urban designer from Istanbul. He received a Master of Architecture in Urban Design from the Harvard Graduate School of Design and has since been working towards the intersection of urban design, placemaking, and data visualization. Juan Francisco Saldarriaga is the Senior Data Design Researcher at the Brown Institute for Media Innovation at Columbia University. He works at the intersection of data, GIS, visualization, journalism, architecture, urbanism, and the humanities, and teaches graduate-level workshops and seminars on mapping, advanced GIS, and data visualization. Dr. Lorenzi Kilgren-Grandi is the chair of the Globalization, Territories, and Integration Working Group at the International Association of Schools and Institutes of Administration, and the co-founder and chair of Urban Flag, and a lecturer in city diplomacy at Sciences Po and École Polytechnique in Paris. His primary expertise and research interests are in the international action of cities and their multilateral response to global challenges such as sustainable development, intercultural dialogue, and digital transition. Hazem Zurakat is the Director of Transportation at Engicon, a regional multidisciplinary engineering consulting firm based in Amman. He is also a co-founder of Man Nasel, a public transport advocacy group that launched Jordan's first public transport map and smartphone application. Hazem is active in the national transportation scene in Jordan. He has co-authored policy studies on the kingdom's transport sector and writes regular columns in local media on matters related to public transportation. Last but not least, our moderator Müge Yorgancı works on participatory democratic management policies at the Istanbul Vision 2050 office. She conducted projects on strategic planning, participatory urban planning models, game design, and cycling cities. She worked as an expert on project cycle management and participation processes at BİMTAŞ, a partner organization of the Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality. She is also a lecturer in the architecture department at Fatih Sultan Mehmet Vakıf University and teaches urban design. Before moving on to our discussion, I would like to remind you that there's going to be a Q&A session in the end, so please feel free to post your question on the chat screen. Thank you all for being with us, and from this point, I leave the word to my friend Müge.
Thank you, Merve. For this nice introduction by you is very helpful for us, for all of us. I'd like to say hello to everybody who joins us tonight. Now I will make a brief introduction. Maybe it's helpful to get the context. For too long, indeed, those of us who live in cities, big or small, have accepted the unacceptable, as we accept in Istanbul. Most of us, most of you, accept that in cities, our sense of time is distorted. We have to spend so much time just to adapt long distances of most of today's cities. The pandemic is accelerating these deeper and longer term trends affecting cities, such as the digitalization of anything, the shift to remote work and virtual delivery of services, and the pedestrianization of streets and increase in cycling as a transportation mode, of course. In Istanbul and in general, this part of the world, in Turkey, the trend was the same. People started to walk or cycle more than before. Also, they prefer private cars more than public transport. To reduce traffic and pandemic risk, most of the municipalities all around the world, to be honest, install new bike lines or extend existing ones, and they increase number of bus lines. In Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality also has established that kind of infrastructure. And also they established a new office named Sustainable Urban Mobility. And it's the first time we have a cycling office in transportation departments just before the pandemic. That was very lucky for us. Thanks to cycling activists in our cities demanding bike lanes and safe streets. Last year, municipality has organized a workshop with citizens, and the results are reported, and report was very important for municipality to understand. We can change the way of using streets in our cities with just small changes. And in the meantime, different cities around the world announced 15-minute city concept. And in a nutshell, the idea is that cities should be designed or redesigned so that within the distance of 15-minute walk or bike ride, people should be able to live the essence of what constitutes the urban experience, to access work, housing, food, health, education, culture, and leisure. That is a paradigm shift, and it's a paradigm shift in the way of living. But on the other hand, strategically clustering food markets, doctors' offices, schools, pharmacies, banks, smaller scale offices that we can imagine other urban social centers and infrastructures, that kind of places for recreation in a close proximity to the people who need them, can shrink the deserts of essential services, especially in distressed neighborhoods, more vulnerable places. And now we will discuss these topics with 4 speakers today. Merve introduced them very nicely, and our topic and our perspective from urban design to urban planning, data science to maps, and finally city diplomacy. It's very nice to say that different perspectives on this topic. So first, we will start with how we can how we ensure that public spaces in our cities represent and serve the people who live near them. And Hayrettin, in this presentation, Hayrettin will feature role of streets in the context of 15 minutes concept, 15-minute city concept, and how we can rethink their role of mobility and access. We will how we will use public space. He will also feature a range of cases that explore how to reclaim in public space is being countered around the world. Now I will give the stage Hayrettin if he is ready to. Okay, thank you. We start with that.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen really quickly. Is it looking fine? Can you guys see the screen? Cool. All right. So thank you for the introduction. It was great to hear what Istanbul is doing. Also, I'm from Istanbul. It's really a great pleasure to be here today. Like Merve mentioned, for the past few years, I'm working at the intersection of urban design, placemaking, and mobility. And today, I was asked to talk about how different cities and around the world are responding to this pandemic situation in different ways. And 10 minutes won't be enough to cover the globe, but I'll do my best to illustrate different ways and tactics that cities have been using while sharing my thoughts around how these are connected to the 15-minute city concept. So like I mentioned, for the past few years, I'm really passionate about understanding how we design our streets for different users and how these users interact with each other. And when the pandemic hit our cities, it shed new light on 2 main functions of our urban streets. The first one of these critical functions is mobility and access. And the pandemic really made us question how we designed our cities in the past for cars, which is one of the biggest sins of our planning history. And it made us question how we walk, how we cycle, how we use public transit. And it reminded us that mobility and access conversation should be around moving people rather than moving cars. And this is an essential question that the 15-minute city concept is also trying to tackle and trying to present it in a different narrative. And even before the pandemic, we knew that sustainable models were much more efficient for moving people from A to B. And when you think of 3 meters of space, which is a typical travel lane, and look at how many people you can move in that space, you can quickly realize that you can move way more people with biking and walking and public transit. So the pandemic gave the cities an opportunity to quickly implement infrastructure that supported this logic. So in a sense, it accelerated this shift to walking and cycling in many ways. And we saw cities like Milan that created citywide plans to implement new pedestrian and bike facilities of 35 kilometers of streets. Or in Tirana, Albania, we saw the city converting parking lanes into bike lanes. Some cities like Boston started building bus lanes, dedicated bus lanes, which needs to be running at a higher frequency because of for essential workers, basically. And the city of Bogota, for example, took a different approach and implemented a citywide speed limit of 50 kilometers per hour, which from my perspective, I think it's one of the most efficient and scalable interventions that a city can do. And we see here in Latvia a similar approach. Rather than implementing bike lanes, they lowered down the speeds so cyclists and motorists can share the road safely. And now as we transition from response to recovery, we see that a lot of these changes are here to stay. And some cities like London, they're now closing streets to vehicle traffic in the morning and afternoon to encourage walking and cycling for students. And I think we'll continue seeing more and more cities incrementally turning their interventions to permanent. And so I think one of the reasons that 15-minute cities is becoming so popular at this moment is that we saw that change is possible at scale. And we don't have to wait for decades to get to where we want to be in terms of mobility. And cities are uniquely positioned to change this travel behaviors, and they can transform how people get around in the city by changing how street space is prioritized or reallocated and used. So it is really exciting from my perspective to see that cities are taking these steps very quickly and moving towards that shift. I want to move from mobility and access to another essential function of our streets, and that is streets compose the largest network of continuous public space in our cities. And pandemic also shed a different light on how we can use our streets, and really shown us that streets doesn't have to be static. Like we saw that streets can encourage flexible uses at different times of the day or year, and we have the design and operational tools to make this work. Again, thinking about 15-minute city concept, diversity and easy access to amenities is one of the key principles, and it is often hard to create that space in dense urban settings. So when we start thinking about how we can repurpose our streets, we see there's also potential to provide these amenities in different neighborhoods using street space. I want to show a couple of examples from around the world to illustrate how these streets are used in different ways. In South Africa, the city expanded testing locations with quick-built tents and provided waiting areas, so providing this health services to its residents. Open air markets became an alternative to brick and mortar stores. In Myanmar, paint was used to mark vendor stalls and separating vendors and allowing customers to shop safely. A lot of streets around the world provided outdoor dining to allow businesses to operate safely, and this has been a critical lifeline during the pandemic for a lot of small businesses. Some cities like Brasilia opened its streets for its residents to jog and exercise safely. And we have seen streets being used for religious gatherings, and like this example in Ivory Coast, where people attended street prayers to celebrate the end of Ramadan. And streets became places where we celebrate our special moments. I'm Turkish and I'm used to street weddings, but seeing one in New York City was a first for me. But we also have to remember that pandemic is not the only crisis that we're going through today. And when we think about the future of our cities, it's not only about having access to a park or a small business, but it's also having access to a space where you can safely protest. So you see in this example, cyclists closing the streets so that people can protest safely. All these examples that I shared is coming from this resource. I won't be able to share more, but with NACTO GDCI, we put this resource called Streets for Pandemic Response and Recovery to compile these emerging practices from around the world. And this is an evolving resource, as all the practices are evolving, but I encourage you to check it out. And if you want to see other examples, and I'm happy to expand on some of them during the discussion. I want to finish off by reiterating that streets should be seen as part of the solution to different crises that we're experiencing and will experience in the future. Whether we are talking about 15-minute cities or livable neighborhoods, streets have an essential role in these frameworks. And all the different interventions that cities are trying to do today will provide the foundation for recovery for generations to come. So we are at that critical moment. Before I finish, also want to pose some questions that I noted during while I was putting this together about this 15-minute city concept, and we can touch on it or come back to it if you want to. But one question is related to this mobility aspect. Like, does this concept make this shift to sustainable transportation options more digestible for general public? Because at the essence and the core of this concept is about that shift, like moving from cars to sustainable mobility. Does it make it more approachable, more acceptable for the public is my question. Another question, what is the game-changing element in the post-pandemic world that makes 15-minute cities more reachable? And again, conversations around remote working, remote education, what changed our thinking that made this concept more applicable and more reachable? And I'm happy to also have a conversation around these factors. And related to this, it's getting a little more specific. With retail, like the relationship with retail, that's something that I've been also thinking. In my neighborhood is changing here in New York City. Businesses are closing. It's related to the pandemic constraints, but after this, we go back to normal. This concept of 15-minute cities, will it be enough to push ourselves out of the comfort zone of e-commerce and shop local? And we're getting more used to ordering online, getting deliveries, everything basically. So what does it mean in that context when we can order everything to our door? So I'm gonna stop there, and looking forward to hear from my colleagues, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Hayrettin. I really like the questions. I note them for the end of the presentations, so it's very nice triggering questions. And now, before Juan, is Juan okay?
Yes, I'm here.
Francisco Saldarilla. Now we will continue with more data part now. I'm looking forward to hear about how data part is looking to pandemic and 15-minute cities and transportation issues. And I'm leaving the stage to Juan.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see well? Perfect. Okay. So welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to talk about tracking transportation in New York City during the pandemic. But first, let me just do a little bit of an introduction. I work in something called the Brown Institute for Media Innovation at the Journalism School. We're actually located at Columbia University, but also at Stanford University. So we're a bi-coastal institution that tries to combine innovation in engineering and computer science with journalism. So how do we tell stories in innovative ways? How to use technology to do better investigation, better storytelling, better communicate the work that journalists do to the public. Our main activity is we give out grants. So we're a little bit of a weird organization in the university because we don't receive grants, we don't apply for grants, but we give out grants. Every year we give out around $1 million in grants to groups located both in New York City, but also in California. This year we have a lot of grants related to COVID. One of the most striking that we're financing this year is a grant that actually is requesting official documents for every city and state in the US relating to COVID. So that way we are understanding how cities and states and municipalities are making decisions on COVID, both in terms of safety, of keeping certain industries open, of allowing certain festivals to proceed. So we're trying to understand how are these decisions being made. We also do a lot of programming, and most of our programming is open, and now we're doing everything virtual, so anybody in the world can actually sign up for our presentations, our seminars. This year, we're doing a lecture series called Changing Course, in which we're trying to figure out how how our understanding of data is becoming more nuanced, more complex, more broad. We recently featured Joanna Drucker talking about visualization of time. And we also featured Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein talking about data feminism. Both of those were great lectures. And at the beginning of next year, we're going to have another lecture on computing and social change. We also do a lot of events related with data, talking about New York City, but also about other data on the US and worldwide. Finally, my personal research is about mapping and data visualization. Recently, I've been working a lot with looking at the privacy policies for different tech companies. That's the graph that you see on the left-hand side. I also did a lot of work on forced displacement in Colombia. And I've been doing a lot of work with transportation. That's the graph that you see on the right-hand side. Anyway, but to the specific topic that I wanted to talk about, I have to preface it by saying that this is a work in progress. So all of the things that you're going to see are still things that we're working on. Hopefully we'll have something published in the next couple of months. But this is just to say that the findings that I'm going to talk about are our initial findings, and things might change a little bit, or there are still to do. So as you all know, the pandemic has hit all of us very hard. You've seen in the New York Times and in other articles that it has hit New York City's subway system particularly hard. The subway is not only facing a huge financial problem because its ridership is almost down to it's less than 60% of what it was at a normal level. But it was also forced to close during the night. New York City was one of the only subways in the world that was open 24 hours a day. And both for health purposes, so to clean the subways, but also for financial purposes, New York City was forced to close the subway between, I believe it's midnight and 5 a.m. Even last week, this is data updated on December 11th by the Metropolitan Transit Authority. So even by last week, ridership was still down by more than 70%. And it has been like that since the beginning of the pandemic in New York. This is a map we did in the last course I taught in the spring semester, looking at decrease in subway ridership. So the size of the circle is the size of the decrease, comparing that to median household income around the city. The parts of the city that have a lighter blue color are the neighborhoods of lower income. And you can see there that the decrease is not evenly distributed geographically. Most of the large decreases has happened, of course, in downtown and midtown Manhattan, so the office centers, but also in the wealthy neighborhoods of Brooklyn Heights, the Upper West Side, the Upper East Side, Tribeca, Soho, whereas the poorer parts of the city have still seen a decrease, but the amount of decrease is lower. And that is in part because a lot of the people living in those neighborhoods do essential work. So they still need to commute to work. They cannot afford to work from home. So this is all to say that the crisis has hit different parts of the city differently, and there is it's an uneven effect on the whole population. Accompany that, there've been a lot of articles talking about how city bikes, scooters, motorcycles have all come to the help of New Yorkers moving around. How people are switching from the subway to bikes or scooters or anything. There was a recent article saying city bikes, scooters, skateboards, anything but the subway. And there are articles proposing new big infrastructure developments for New York to capitalize on the fact that New Yorkers are biking more and are using other means of transportation. So this is the background, and we wanted to really try to understand if this was true, to what extent it was true, how have those changes played out throughout the pandemic, how those changes relate to the different policies that the government has put in place, to different lockdown levels or reopening phases, and sort of dig a little deeper into the data. So that's what we've been doing. Of course, we started first with subway use during the pandemic. The blue line is subway use in 2019. The orange line is subway use in 2020. And you can see how there was a dramatic drop in subway use. One thing that's interesting here is that the dramatic drop happened before the official mandate from the governor to keep all of the essential workers at home. So that mandate happened around March 15th, but the drop started around March 7th. So one thing that we found throughout this research is that people are taking or making changes in their transportation patterns before the government enact policies. So they're preemptively changing the way they move around. This is just the percentage change in subway use. You can see that starting in March 30th, the subway usage was down by 90%, and it has gone up slightly, but it's still, as you saw in the previous table, it's still around 70% below what it was before. City Bike, on the other hand, has had a very different evolution. You see that at the beginning of the year, City Bike started with higher numbers than what it had in 2019. It did have a significant drop at the beginning of the pandemic, but it has steadily picked up, and it's almost at the same levels as it was in 2019. It's a little clearer here. You see the big drop around March 15th, March 7th, March 15th, March 30th, but it has steadily picked up. City Bike, the reason why you see it so spiky is because it's a transportation system that it's very sensitive to the weather. So, for example, that drop in the week ending June 7th, I can't remember specifically, but it's probably due to a week where it rained a lot in New York City. But overall, you see how the usage has risen almost back to the levels of 2019. Yellow taxis is another transportation mode that we looked at. It has also dropped significantly. However, the whole taxi industry in New York City has been in decline for a few years now, in great part due to Uber and Lyft and other ride-sharing companies that have taken a big share of the market. And also this year, also because of the pandemic, they also have been specifically hit because a lot of the taxi trips were dependent on nightlife in New York City. And that's one of the things that closed and hasn't opened. There's no Broadway shows, movie theaters are almost empty. So that industry has been particularly hard hit during the pandemic. These are the three modes of transportation compared to each other. And here you can really see how biking is reacting very differently than the subway or taxis. Biking is the orange, subways is blue, and purple is taxis. And the reason why the taxi data set only goes up until July 5th is because that's the only data that they have released so far. I also have to say that this is all done with public open data that's available to anybody. And so that's one of the reasons why we've been able to do this kind of work. Okay, so we wanted to dig a little deeper into these statistics. And first we created a series of maps. This is a map for City Bike usage for every week of the year. It starts the first week of January. The blue color represents neighborhoods where the usage is higher than what it was in 2019. The red ones are neighborhoods where the usage is lower. And you see how around week 12, 13, around here, this is March, there's a significant drop all over the city covered. This is the parts of the city that have City Bike stations. But once you move on, let's say after April, you can see how certain neighborhoods start picking up again and actually are seeing more usage than what they saw in 2019. And I'll zoom into a couple of different snapshots in a second. This is the similar overview for the subway. You can see how at the beginning of the year, it was more or less the same as in 2019. And then once the pandemic started, all the neighborhoods throughout the whole city saw a huge decrease. There have been some neighborhoods that saw less of a decrease, but overall, all of them saw a very big decrease. And same for taxis. They actually started the year with a lower usage than in 2019, and they have stayed that way. Okay, so zooming into 3 specific weeks, the one on the left is the week ending March 8th, so right before the pandemic really hit New York City. The one in the middle is the week ending March 29th, so right during the height of that first wave. And the one on the right is the week ending August 2nd. So that one, you can actually see the recovery. And I wanted to highlight a couple of neighborhoods that have really picked up in terms of city bike ridership. One is this one around here, which is Astoria in Queens. This one down in Brooklyn is Crown Heights and Bed-Stuy, Bedford-Stuyvesant, and both the Upper East Side and Upper West Side. Of course, neighborhoods like Midtown and downtown Manhattan and downtown Brooklyn are still seeing lower levels of city bike ridership. So the point I wanted to make here is the recovery of city bike has not happened uniformly across the city. It's centered on very specific neighborhoods. These are the same weeks for subway ridership. And here, as I said before, there are no neighborhoods that have reached the same level as in 2019, but there are certain neighborhoods that have a lower decrease. For example, the South Bronx, Harlem, or certain parts of Brooklyn and Queens. And again, these neighborhoods normally correspond to neighborhoods with a lower income where people are often employed as essential workers and they still need to commute to work. Okay, so given that city bike has seen a much higher recovery, I wanted to look at the specific types of trips. So look at the trips by, yes?
Will you wrap up in minutes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm almost done. So we wanted to look at trips by time of day to see what trips were picking up. And what you see here, the orange ones are the trips corresponding to the morning commute. So the morning commute trips are the ones that are picking up the least. The other ones, the ones corresponding to the hours between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. or 4 p.m. and 10 p.m. or even the late night trips, the 10 a.m. to 4 a.m., those have gone back to normal levels. So this is something to be expected. And then when you look at the length of the trip, you see that the longer trips, the red line and the purple line, these are trips of more than 30 minutes. Those are the ones that have really increased. So this tells us that people are using city bikes to commute, not just to go to the supermarket, not just to go around the block. And that those short trips, maybe the ones that people used to take to go to the subway station, are not increasing as much as the other ones. Okay, so what's next? The next phase of this research is to run regressions against demographic data, so income, race, commuting patterns, and to run regressions against built environment data, such as land use, housing density, and distance to employment. So really digging into these different aspects of the built environment, of demographics, to see if they are correlated with the rise or declining in city bike or subway usage, and to really understand how the differences that we're seeing during the pandemic play out in space, how they are related to the inequalities around the city. A lot of people have have looked at the pandemic and as a one thing that affects everybody equally, and we're trying really to disaggregate that and to really understand how it affects different people differently. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. I'm looking forward to a Q&A session to ask questions. I have many questions, really. Thank you. Thank you very much for this nice presentation. Thank you. Now, to save time, I speak less than I planned, but it's very nice. Now we go to Hazem Surakiat, Director of Transportation in GICON. Hello, Hazem.
I'm good, thank you very much.
For you.
Thank you. Do you see the slides?
Yes,
okay.
We saw.
Thank you all. Thank you, Columbia Global Centers, for inviting me to participate in this webinar. I want to start with something you may find a bit odd, but I think it would be useful to set the scene and give you some context about the situation in Amman, Jordan. For a few days in March, in the beginning of the pandemic, the government, our government, the government of Jordan, embarked on a huge logistical endeavor. It came up with a scheme or an arrangement with bakeries across the country to sell bread through public transport buses. And what you see here is actually bread on a bus. And these buses were assigned to roam, the streets of different neighborhoods and sell people bread, sorry. And bread, of course, is a basic necessity here in Jordan. And the idea was to restrict people's movement while trying to provide them with at least some basic necessities. Needless to say, this scheme, failed miserably. It only lasted a few days, and it was too much to manage. The government realized that it can't get into managing selling bread, and people needed, more stuff to buy than just bread. I'm only showing this to highlight the differences, among countries in imposing restrictions. We keep hearing about lockdowns and big terms like, a full national lockdown in some countries, but those things can mean very different things in different places. And that can really have an impact on how people behave and interact with and move around their cities and their neighborhoods. In Jordan, and I'll go through this again a bit later, restrictions on movements were real. They were serious. There were curfews imposed through something called the defense law, which is, in Jordan, one step below martial law, and they were partly even enforced by the military. And before moving forward, I just wanted to maybe quickly take a step back and give those of you not familiar with Jordan and Amman some background information. Amman is the capital of Jordan, a city of 4.5 million people. It's a hilly city. It's very much car-oriented, car-dominated. Car ownership is on the rise at over 6% a year. The percentage of trips made on public transport in the capital is somewhere around the mid-teens. Public transport users are largely captive, meaning they use the system because they have no other choice, not because it's more convenient or more comfortable than using a private car. And if there's one thing to say that Amman is known for is that it's not the most pedestrian-friendly city out there. Sidewalks are often uneven or have obstacles or are non-existent for reasons that we don't have to get into today. Traffic congestion in Amman has been on the rise, and it's expected to get even worse if we continue with the current trajectory. Why? Not only because of natural population growth, but also because of other demographic factors. 45% of our population in Jordan is under the age of 20. Less than 14% of working age women actually work, which is one of the lowest rates globally. So as people grow older, as more women enter the workforce, there's going to be a huge increase in demand for mobility. So back to the pandemic, early on in March and April and part of May even, Jordan managed to really limit the number of deaths and cases. I think we had around 9 or 10 deaths by the early summer. By contrast, as of the brief that they just released an hour ago, we have now over 3,500 deaths. So things really changed later in the summer. But in those early days, there were very strict lockdowns, as I alluded to in the beginning. For weeks, people were only allowed to move on foot and at certain times of the day, and only to buy necessities from their local neighborhood stores. Large supermarkets were completely closed. Moving by car was not permitted at all. Public transport services were completely suspended. So unlike what we saw in other cities where they were left open for essential workers, they were completely suspended for a while here. So in those early days, people's movement was restricted by time, by space, and by mode of transport. And as I said, restricted, and enforced by the state. And this is very important to note, because what we saw was not people, as maybe we just heard in New York, there were not people voluntarily choosing to travel a certain way and to do certain things because of public health concerns, even though some people have made individual choices. But these were restrictions imposed by the state and strictly enforced. And what we saw during that time was people in a way reclaiming the street. There were no cars and sidewalks, aren't the best. So people were walking on the street itself to go to shop for basic goods. Corner stores or neighborhood stores really saw a surge in demand and witnessed even something like a renaissance. Some people were reminiscing about the old days, and how the neighborhood stores really made a comeback. On the left here, you see how people were lining up to buy groceries at one neighborhood store. And someone here is holding a sign with a hashtag that trended for a couple of days that basically says, "Proud of my neighborhood." So it's just a sign that people in this guy's neighborhood were following social distancing and so on. And even though technically travel was only allowed on foot, what we also saw in Amman was the adoption of bicycles, like we've seen in many other cities, as my colleagues mentioned earlier. But this is really rare in Amman. Cycling is not a common mode of transport here because of the hilly topography mostly, and lack of cycling infrastructure. It's not safe to cycle in the city. There are groups that cycle for leisure and athletic purposes, but cycling as a mode of transport is not really common. So that was really unique. There isn't data on how large this was. Some say it was primarily, limited to areas that are somewhat more affluent, but it was a noticeable trend for a while. And I've even heard of bicycle prices going up during that time, so people struggling to find bikes to buy them. Of course, the government later realized that these restrictions were not sustainable, and then they adopted a different model, which is sort of what we're living in today. Movement was no longer restricted to a certain area, so no longer restricted in space or mode of transport, but only by time of day. So there is now a nightly curfew. There's curfew on Friday, which is a weekend here, and certain sectors are closed, like schools, gyms, etc. And when these restrictions were lifted, things got very quickly back to quote unquote normal. In a sense, people got back to their cars, to shopping at large malls and supermarkets. There's even a joke that people who were struggling to find bikes and ended up paying a large amount now are struggling to sell these bikes. And I've heard there's no data on that, but anecdotal evidence even suggests that the surge in demand in local neighborhood stores actually went away or went significantly down as people, went back to their old habits. Now, there are many arguments about why things quickly went back to this, normal. Is it because the restrictions were too short and they did not, trigger a long-term shift in behavior? Is it because the restrictions were forced, as we said, and not, out of people voluntarily making choices? Is it partly because the city didn't take advantage of the lockdown to implement certain changes to the infrastructure? So Hayretin mentioned examples in Milan, in Latvia, in Bogota. The city and municipalities here did not take advantage to change to create new facts on the ground in terms of mobility in the city. It's probably a combination of different factors that led to this. But I don't want to belittle or dismiss what happened during the spring in Amman. I think there's much to be said, and I think there has been a positive change in the discourse and even some change in people's behavior. In this picture, this was taken in the late summer, early fall. You see people using the lanes of the BRT that's still under construction in Amman for walking and cycling. So, we do see on average more people outside today than we used to, pre-COVID. But this was part of a report done by an online news portal here, and as people here told the journalists that they're mostly walking and cycling for leisure, because of the lack of public open spaces in the city. So when it comes to trips from A to B for work or for shopping or for education, people still mostly went back to using their cars for most people, or public transport for some. And if that says anything, I think it says that Amman is still far from being a 15-minute city. This can be attributed to many different factors: the lack of pedestrian infrastructure, the lack of adequate retail facilities within walking distance, and maybe the topography. So in essence, unlike cities like New York, where we just saw some examples from there, for most trips in Amman that people have to take, they do not have a multitude of options in terms of transport modes. We're still not at a point where people can weigh different choices and choose the mode that is more convenient. There is always a mode that is far superior than others. If people have a car, they choose a car for all their trips, or a mode to which a person is captive because of their income, their place of residence, or their place of work or education. So there's also an important aspect here where inequality comes in. But again, there has been some change, positive change in the discourse. Although it's too early to tell how impactful and long-term that will be, the city conducted a survey about people's opinion on access to services during the lockdown, and hopefully, they'll act on the results of that survey. We at NGCon were part of a group called the Architecture Engineering Business Council in Jordan. We conducted a study funded by the Friedrich Ebert Foundation on resilient neighborhoods in Amman. So we looked at a few case studies within Amman neighborhoods and proposed some changes to land uses, to the streetscape, to make neighborhoods more resilient, to provide people with better access to services within walking distance, and better pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. I won't have time, obviously, to go through the study today, but I'd be happy to share with you, maybe on the chat box, the link for those who are interested. The study is available online in both English and Arabic. There's a professor named Scott Galloway from NYU, and he keeps saying that COVID-19 has been more of an accelerant than a change agent. We've certainly seen this in Amman, like many other cities, and like my colleagues mentioned in the introduction, the acceleration in the use of electronic payments, delivery apps, working from home to some extent, and so on. But has COVID really served as a change agent in terms of how people move around their cities, how people interact with their neighborhoods, specifically in the city of Amman? I think, I hope so, but I think this is yet to be seen. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Hazem, for timing also, just in time. Thank you. I would like to remind our audiences may submit their questions to Q&A box before I skip to Lorenzo. Now Lorenzo will give a presentation about city diplomacy and pandemic in terms of 15-minute city. I give the stage to Lorenzo now.
Thank you very much, Muge. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm delighted to have listened to the presentation of my colleagues. I think we have already a lot of food for thought. I will try to add my little share now. My perspective is a little bit different. It's the one from political science, I would say, from international relations. But we'll see how this international dimension connects to the local one. So I'm going to share with you my screen. So my presentation will be very quick and divided in three parts. The first one, we will see what city diplomacy means, how this has evolved throughout the last decades. Second part is devoted to how city diplomacy has responded to COVID-19 crisis. And the last part, in the conclusions, we will try to match this global engagement of cities dealing with big transnational issues with the need for immediate and very local intervention. So just to immediately begin into this topic, this is a quick comparison between what has happened at national and city diplomacy level over the last few months. Basically, the ideas, the values are the same. So we're talking about cooperation, we are talking about solidarity. But unfortunately, intergovernmental level, the one which is headed by the United Nations, has shown a lot of limitation. This also has happened in several regional organizations, where most of nations have actually implemented, at least in the first part of the management of the pandemic, their own single strategy without creating a common coalition, without cooperating and creating a common response to this pandemic, despite the fact that since the beginning, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and other international organizations clearly set the route, set the direction toward this form of cooperation. Meanwhile, cities immediately connected with each other. This is a screenshot on the right of a call of 48 mayors that have been called by Mayor Eric Garcetti of Los Angeles, the chair of one of the most important city networks called C40, originally devoted and still devoted, of course, to the fight to climate change, but that has transformed itself in a sort of a COVID-19 support group. Here you can see different mayors that together share their best practices and decided to create a task force in order to address the big issue of the recovery, post-pandemic recovery. We will go back to this point at the last part of the presentation. So how has this diplomacy emerged? How has this happened? Well, a little more than 100 years ago, in 1913, in the Flemish city of Ghent, for the first time, a city network was created in the framework of the Universal Exposition that took place in this city. It was the International Union of Cities. You probably haven't heard of this because it doesn't exist anymore. This was the first city network. It predates us for 7 years, the creation of the League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations, and wanted, in fact, to promote inter-community cooperation in the name of democracy and peaceful agreement in the construction and administration of cities. So we see that this connection between the international level and the very local one, including the urbanism approach, is really inside of city diplomacy. Why cities interact with each other? But, well, they really know they share a lot of challenges. Those challenges are in fact evolving and of different nature, but they are transnational. They go cut across national borders, and they include, for example, now climate change that we have already mentioned, as well as migration, violent extremism, digital transition, and so on. By addressing these challenges, mayors have emerged with a series of common traits based on universal values. And those universal values are particularly evident when you have a clash between the city and the national levels. This has happened in particular recently, when cities in the US have stepped in order to allow the total amount of greenhouse gases emissions allotted to the US in the framework of the Paris Agreement to be respected through their own involvement, even though the federal government decided to step out of the agreement. And finally, local interests. So cities, when they go international, they don't just follow those universal values, but they also want to support their own ecosystem, their own economic actors. And this is the whole discourse based on economic component of city diplomacy, the city branding, and basically the positioning of a city as an important international economic pole. The main tool for city diplomacy in the different thematic focuses that it has developed is the city network. So a sort of international organization based, whose members are in fact cities. You have that at a global level with organizations such as UCLG here, which is the successor of the International Union of Cities and counts more than 240,000 local governments worldwide, equivalent to 70% of the world's population, or at a regional level with, for example, Eurocities or Mercociudades, respectively in Europe and in Mercosur. they deal, these networks, with a variety of issues. Actually, 71% of them have multi-purpose, so they deal with more than one focus. But the single thematic focuses that are most frequent are in fact the governance, when you have a focus on allowing, enhancing the capacity of a local government to respond to its citizens through services, and basically working in a better way to enhance the quality of life of citizens. The second point is, in terms of frequency, environmental sustainability with C40 we already mentioned, but also, for example, the global covenant of mayors for climate and energy, that is 10,000 cities and local governments worldwide. Then you have fight to inequality. For example, the Mayor's Migration Council, that is particularly active in positioning cities in the global debate on the future of migration. So not only cities as sort of participants in sort of a consultation initiative, but also as actors in decision-making process. That's the goal, given the fact that most migrants concentrate in cities, as the UN figures have pointed out. And finally, culture and creativity, with organizations such as the Organization of World Heritage Cities that unites more than 300 cities that have a World Heritage site in their administrative boundaries, and then have similar issues in this period, in particular related to the basically the fact that there is no international, very limited national tourism. So all this network were swiftly able to adapt and embrace the new needs of the pandemic, and try to support their members and their communities in order to provide better solutions. Not all cities are in fact involved in city diplomacy. This is important to say. It's still a majority. You have most of big cities, what you can call global cities, the capitals, the economic capitals of different countries or important economic regions throughout the world. You have a part, actually a minority of middle-sized cities, and you have only a fraction of small cities worldwide participating to that. How comes? You actually need four preconditions for that to be successful. First of all, decentralization, so the capacity of the local government to set its own route, to follow its own leadership and strategy. Economic and human resources in order to define and navigate the complex waters of international relations. So there is really a lack of training for that worldwide. Only a few courses are offered. I offer a few of them here in Paris, but in many countries there is actually no such a possibility. So there is a lack of trained professionals in that. They have to reinvent themselves a little bit, and it's also quite an expensive practice, even though it can become, if well designed, of course, something that brings money and resources to the city. Leadership and engagement are absolutely important, especially in those times where solidarity and engagement are put into question. So it is important for the mayor and the whole council to be able to engage the society in something which is absolutely positive for the different local actors and the population, and finally clarify that into a strategy. This is important for the long term and for the consistency of the actions. A few examples on what is happening now in terms of urban transformation. Just we can talk a lot about that if you want in the questions, but just to example, reinventing cities, that has now a second part called Reinventing Cities Students. It's actually a global competitions open respectively to professional and students of urban planning and architecture to reinvent a series of sites that are underutilized in a series of cities, and municipalities put them at the center of a competition that has to sort of take into consideration the environmental aspect, so with no emission neighborhoods that are most frequently designed, but also an important component of social interaction and basically evolution at human size. And this human size urbanism is also at the center of this new model of new approach developed by IMF, the International Association of Francophone Mayors. It's a city network, 2/3 of which is composed of African mayors, which is now opening up to this project where the Francophonie as a space is analyzed not only on the past of its urban aspect, on the way cities were built, but also the direction the cities want to take now, the values that move urbanism now. And of course, this is integrated with this very important central role of citizens that somehow is groundbreaking, is disrupting towards compared to what has been in the past, and we have seen that in the previous presentations. So responding to COVID-19, we have seen 4 different actions emerging from city diplomacy. First of all, tangible help. And this went through direction that were new. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had Western cities helping Asian cities with donating masks. China received a lot of masks, Chinese cities, Chinese provinces and regions at the beginning from the twin and sister local governments. And then, of course, the direction was inverted. With donation of masks and medical equipment directed to many developed countries, developed cities. The city of Milan, for example, received a lot from its sister city of Shanghai, but as well as support and help from another European city. Frankfurt is a sister city who donated money to the fund to the response to the pandemic. Regional and global advocacy, it's another very important element that developed with cities that try to put a pressure on national governments in order to have the same approach of solidarity and cooperation. And this has been done by organizations at both regional and global level. But we will focus now on knowledge exchange and strategy co-creation. So knowledge exchange has been used mainly for the short-term impact of the COVID crisis. So basically how to quickly adapt, flexibly adapt the city. And we have seen many examples in the previous presentation that actually circulated a lot, and they circulated through the existing connection between cities, as well as through a series of portals, a series of websites with important databases that have been put in place by city networks, organizations, both from the public and private sectors. There are more than 60 of them that have been documented. And a few examples here from a global perspective, the Cities for Global Health put in place by 3 city networks, Metropolis, UCLG, and Atlas, with more than 650 best practices from 102 cities all across the world. And COVID News, which is a platform for big European cities where they shared their best practices and they were able to this way fuel the debate in each cities. In terms of sharing best practices, an important element is, of course, I will go very quickly on this because it's already been said, on emergency urbanism. So the idea of having the sort of restaurants on the streets, this has been initially launched by the mayor of Vilnius in Lithuania and quickly adopted all across the world. The mayor of Vilnius defined the big open air cafe program. Bogota has already been mentioned by highlighting for this 50-kilometer speed limit, but it's also very important the fact that they have, since the 70s, this program called La Ciclovia, bike lanes that have been even expanded. It's an important network and that has further been expanded during this pandemic, and many cities took example. And finally, of course, the 15-minute city, which was part of the program for re-election of Mayor Hidalgo in Paris, and that is one of the reasons we are meeting now, given the capacity to attract interest and make accessible this need to rethink the city in a way that puts the citizen at the center. Regarding the co-creation of recovery strategies, we have a lot of task forces that have been created by cities in order to redefine the city of the future. Just two of them, probably the most famous one is U20, which is a city network by cities, the biggest cities in the G20 countries, that have developed this sort of agenda in order to call for multi-level cooperation, given the fact that unfortunately local governments expect to see their funds and their revenues to fall between 15 and 25% in 2021 due to this the fact that most cities rely heavily on property incomes, and these are falling down given the difficult ongoing situation. C40 has developed an integrated approach to put together the fight to climate change, the fight to inequalities, and the need to recover from this bad socio-economic impact of the pandemic. So this is a strategy called the Mayor's Agenda for a Green and Just Recovery that has a long-term perspective for the next decades, and includes a clear mention of the 15-minute city as a best practice that has been developed with examples coming from Milan and Paris. So to come to my conclusions, well, this I will try to be a little to show a little bit of critical thinking to fuel the upcoming debate. First of all, my vision, I'm pretty sure that cities, as they have always done, they will be able to adapt and continue their success. We have too much to benefit from urban life to renounce it. So I don't agree with those experts, actually a minority of them, that says this will be the sort of end of big cities and the return to the countryside. I don't believe that at all. Cities will be able to adapt. Of course, they will need to adapt. They have done in the past. The plague brought us the waste management system, cholera, especially due to the research done in the mid of the 19th century in London, brought us to sanitation systems. And COVID-19 has brought, as we have seen in the previous presentation, a series of elements, including the environment, a new approach to community life, new approach to well-being, and of course, the integration of digital technologies. All of that can be defined as a little bit of the approach of the 15-minute cities. So 15-minute city is a very simple approach. It's a buzzword, it's easy to communicate and resonates to the fact that actually the 15-minute city has always been the city, apart from what happened in the 20th century with the introduction of cars and this sort of sprawling of cities in many countries in the world. The problem is that we are talking about cities that are basically not far from being a 15-minute cities. Paris, Milan, those cities were 15-minute cities, and they can become, once again, 15-minute cities. And then after all, it's what has been done also by many mayors without using these terms over the last few years. But there are a series of risks that, given the fact that it's not that easy to adapt to this 15-minute city, this can create further inequalities. In the framework of a city, between neighborhoods that can and that already built around this sort of approach, and more frequently, those are the richest neighborhoods. I enjoyed what Juan showed us about this difference in income, in the different adaptation to the crisis, and then you can have exacerbating inequalities also between cities and between cities in different countries. Finally, this can also deprioritize the long distance commuters. We have to take into consideration that we are not just all lucky to have everything and our job in this 15 minutes. It is important to work toward this direction. And this is definitely a goal. What I want to, my perspective is that the 15-minute cities is a goal that needs to be adapted to the different situations. It is very difficult to define it as a general solution. It is not, it has to be adapted. And how to adapt it? Well, you have to use these two elements of a methodology that I've been describing up until now, that really is the foundation of city diplomacy. So on one side, of course, bilateral and multilateral city diplomacy, this connection with cities that are experiencing similar situations. So of course, Paris can relate to Milan and vice versa, but cities that have spread and divided into very vast neighborhoods with low facilities, low access to transportation, public transportation, and no basically very low density, have to think to the 15-minute city in a totally different way, and it's important to cooperate.
Lorenzo, maybe we can keep time for discussion if you can wrap up.
Yeah, I thank you. Yeah, I'm finishing. I just want to say the other part of it, it's the multi-level and multi-stakeholder approach, which is the capacity to link with other levels of government, including for this very important financial element that we'll see will create difficulty to cities. So it's important to unify and sort of centralize the resources in the hand of those who can change the city, which are the mayors, and multi-stakeholder approach to be sure that this change and respond to the wish and needs of the population and local actors. So in a public-private perspective, this will allow for a context-specific responses. My advice to cities all across the world is try to support this dual approach for now, of course, more in a virtual way, and possibly very soon in a hybrid or presential way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, thank you for your presentation. Now you can end the presentation as well. Okay. Welcome back, all the speakers. Now I will start with the Q&A questions. So the questions discussion part. We have about 15 minutes. It's very meaningful. We have 15 minutes for discussion as well. One of the earlier questions, I think that was to Hayrettin, but I like to use it as a general question from Abir Alham. What about the governance of these 15-minute neighborhoods will be as centralized as the normal city? Governance part as important as diplomacy and participation part, as I also think. Do you like to add any points to that question? Is there anyone who would like to answer this? And I read the other question. Maybe it can trigger.
I can step in a little bit. In terms of transportation, the governance always needs to be, I would say, at a larger level, larger level than what it is. For example, in New York City, we have something called the green taxis, and the green taxis are limited to picking up people on specific zones. And that there's a purpose for that, because in the past, yellow taxis would only go to the areas where they would really get they would sure to get passengers, and they would leave the outer boroughs of New York without service. So a few years ago, they established the green taxis, which they could not pick up passengers in sort of downtown or midtown. And that created a supply of taxis for those neighborhoods. But at the same time, that carried some costs. you had a lot of green taxis dropping off people in downtown and then having to travel many kilometers empty because they couldn't pick up anybody. The point is, the purpose of the legislation was, it had a good intention, but the effects of legislation at a very micro scale have macro scale effects. So you do need to consider how specific rules that apply to specific neighborhoods, to specific areas of the city, can have effects on the broader region, city, state. So you always need to move up a little bit.
Thank you for this example. It's nice to search on it. To be honest, I'm curious about it, the green taxis. And I'd like to ask another question now. The question is, besides the infrastructure change, how can we change the culture around the transportation? For example, in the Netherlands, bikes are essential part of a daily life. How can we make it also happen in Turkey? It's a big question.
Yes, I can jump on this a bit.
Yeah, and also then maybe Hazem can mention about Stipi Amman streets. He also make a benchmarking with Istanbul. Sorry, Hayrettin, please.
Yeah, so just a quick answer. I mean, we have to acknowledge, like, Netherlands and Denmark didn't become bike-friendly cities overnight. It took time, even decades in those countries as well, to come to the point where they are right now. And there are critical factors that they invested in, like infrastructure being one. If you build it, they will come. That's like a very common phrase we've been hearing. It's one of the essential things the cities should do. I would say network is a big factor too. Like, you can build bike lanes, but if it's not planned and if it's not connected, it won't work. So I think that's another critical factor that should be taught. And I would add strong political leadership. I think that's key. You need a political leader who will be brave enough to kind of go into that wave, and there will be resistance, of course. Change is hard, but I think having that leadership is also critical to make that happen. So those are the three critical items, I would say.
I just want to second that. I think those three aspects are crucial. And one thing that Hayrettin mentioned at the beginning, it takes time. It really does take time. New York has been building its bicycle infrastructure for a long time, and it's still underperforming in terms of the density, the proximity of things. The infrastructure that it has is still underperforming, but it's steadily rising. So it does take time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'd like to, I mean, I totally agree with what's been said about political leadership. And I mean, you know, in Amman, for example, the city, the municipality of Amman had nothing to do with public transport, for example, until about 2007, 2008. So, you know, traditionally they're used to just building roads and building bridges. So changing mindsets and building capacity at public agencies to think about mobility as, you know, moving people, not moving cars, multimodal systems where there's cycling, there's public transport, etc. I think really helps, and this is where maybe, you know, the governance, the city diplomacy and the multilateral agencies and even the international funding agencies could play a role by pushing, you know, a more aggressive agenda in that regard.
Thank you. I'd like to add also something on this. I think municipalities and city governments should work with activists more, because it's sounds like it's nothing without any demand. So citizens also should continue to demand their walkable streets and cycling lines. So it's important, more citizenship and more activism. for
And I should say in Amman, the lockdown triggered some, I got a couple of messages from different people who are trying to start up, advocacy groups to call for better cycling infrastructure. So, hopefully it'll happen and be sustained.
Yeah, in Istanbul, really, we are thankful for that kind of activism to get that kind of services. I continue. Yes, please.
May I shortly ask about, because thank you all for all these interesting presentations. I really learned a lot from all of you. So I think there were interesting convergences between your presentations. As Lorenzo, you mentioned that, these cities were once 15-minute cities, right? But on the other hand, Juan, you mentioned about essential workers who need to go to work and they need to commute. And then there is this whole issue of inequality that became, more and more clear with the pandemic, as these, workers whose jobs are most vulnerable are likely to move rather, further into the outskirts of the city in the coming years. So what are we going to make about this? Because even in Paris, people commute for, they have long commutes to get to work, and in Istanbul and in Rio. So what are we going to make of this kind of I wouldn't say a dichotomy, but this interesting point.
Thank you very much for the question. I think this is very hard to answer, actually, because it will need a lot of time. I do agree that this kind of transformation won't happen overnight, and mayors that are willing to create better conditions for the less fortunate, for those who actually have been more exposed to the pandemic, to the health component of the pandemic, of course. This is where the action has to concentrate. The 50-minute city, as it has been presented by C40, the network I was talking about, has to be implemented starting from the less compatible neighborhoods. Taking consideration that this is where you need to start. It's not the city center where rich people live and basically already commute, as we have seen, we already have the facilities in order to work from home or take the bicycle and go buy the groceries, but actually intervene where groceries are not available. You don't have bike lanes. You don't have any access to determinate and important public services, and so on. So this is important in the framework of municipal action. It is also important to see those diverging dynamics from my perspective. On one side, mayors will have the potential to sort of harness this global attention, this global sensibility that has been developed. So in electoral terms, the cost of implementing, the political cost of implementing those changes, so spending money for this part of the city that needs the most, this is probably easier now. So there is a lower political cost. But at the same time, we have already been seeing a lot of a transformation that we initially said, oh, this will be permanent. That is wonderful. Everybody will continue to go this way. There is a high risk that is, as it is already happening in China, many of these solutions will be just forgotten because there is no more the feeling of need for it. So why the cholera and the plague brought to this permanent changement of the city? Because the citizens and the administration felt the risk was still there. So of course we will want to celebrate the end of the pandemic as soon as we get the vaccine, as soon as we are able to go out and return to our life. But it is important to remember that this was a little bit as an alarm of what might happen in the future, due to, unfortunately, this connection between biodiversity, loss of biodiversity, and a bad density in cities. So it's important to be aware of the risk and continue working and taking a sort of the maximum possibility to exploit this support, widespread support for change.
Thank you. Very nice question and answer again. And now, indeed, we have talked about more neighborhood schools, more equal neighborhood settings, and better food access, more third places such as community comes together, maybe libraries, etc., better housing access, and that kind of equalities between neighborhoods. Maybe that kind of infrastructures will be necessary to set around the city more equal. But in the end, 15-minute city may mean for pedestrians, for cyclists and drivers in cities, as well as how it shifts kind of 100 years of thinking of urban planning is changing, because urban planning is based on zoning. Working areas, living areas, and recreational areas. So now we are trying to combining that kind of infrastructures or different uses in the city together, and this is a big shift for cities. One of the questions also about considering this also post-pandemic situation. It's from Selin Yıldız. What do you think? What do you think might be permanent changes or habits in transportation and public space arrangements? Especially that arrangements part is linked to my introduction. Thank you. And yeah, now that question is to the middle again.
So I can again jump in, and I actually had a question to Juan related to this, seeing his presentation. And one of the things, big red flags that I see right now is related to public transit, right? Like in the perception of general public, subways, metros, these are, people are questioning if they are safe or not. So I see that as a big issue, big challenge that we have to face right now. It's very urgent because it might change people's habit, and it will be a hell scenario for us. So looking at Juan's data, like I know maybe the aim of the research wasn't really figuring out if there's a relationship between COVID and public transit use, but I've seen studies that there's no real connection with the increase of public transit use and COVID spreads or increases. So I think that's an area. I don't know if Juan, you have more thoughts around that issue we can discuss.
Yeah, so I think I have seen the same studies. At the beginning of the pandemic, I believe there was a study that linked some outbreaks of COVID to subway usage. And then that study was refuted by multiple studies saying, actually, there are very, very few cases of COVID that can be traced to subway usage in particular. However, I totally agree that the perception of the people, even amongst my colleagues, is that the subway is a place to avoid. So it's a lingering fear that is not necessarily supported by the data. So that is one thing that will need to be addressed either by education, by like communication from the administration. I have ridden the subway a couple of times, and New Yorkers will tell you this: the subway right now is as clean as you will ever see it. New York's subway was never the most clean or fresh subway. Now it is sparkling. So that is part of trying to change the perception of the subway. The other big problem with transportation right now, especially in New York, is the funding of the subway. The MTA, so it's a regional organization, their forecast for the economic crisis of the subway is they have sort of a doomsday scenario. They're saying that without government aid, the subway will suffer huge losses or is suffering losses of money, and they will either have to cut services or cut employment, or sort of do cuts in other places. So especially for economies and sort of cities or models of city governance like what we have here in the US, where these city agencies receive very little financial aid from the federal government, it's going to be very difficult to come out of the pandemic in a good financial state. They already started the pandemic in a bad shape. So that's something else that needs to be addressed. And right now, everybody, and speaking of the US, everybody's looking to Congress to see if there's going to be help for the states, right, from the federal government to the states, so that they then can reinvest on education, transportation, health, all of these services that are really strained right now. So that's something that we will need to figure out in the coming months.
Thank you. I think we have come to the end of our questions. And one of the final questions is about taxes in Bogota, and it's about the vision of the 9-minute capital with no metro. It's about metro situation of Bogota. If there is any reflection on Bogota metro system, we can answer this, but otherwise, this question is to Lorenzo, I think. Is there a risk that the 40 plus group and other alliances you cited may turn with the time in no more than trendy jamborees? Do you have a short answer to this, or?
Well, I'm not sure I'm getting the question, but it might be in fact that it's related to an accusation that has some valid ground, can have some valid ground of city diplomacy to represent a sort of branding opportunity for cities rather than a tool to implement impactful solutions on the ground. This is true to some extent to in many city networks, because usually there are little political sort of capacity to enforce the city's action, even though the city stays a little bit on the backside and doesn't act in a very active way. We can see that in that this is not very different from what happens in intergovernmental organizations like the United Nations or the European Union. We all know that the level of involvement of the members of these international organizations change from time to time. It is important to say that this cooperation at the international level, at the city level, are not compulsory. So these are always based on the will of mayors and cities to implement it. And this is linked to a complex discourse of the fact that in fact, cities do not own personality of international law, so they cannot have a sort of compulsory engagement unless their government allows it. Anyway, yeah, this is I can say this is a valid point, and hopefully in the future cities will use this more as an opportunity to implement a change rather than take a family photo with colleague mayors from important cities abroad.
Thank you for this answer also. Now we are end of our time, Merve. Thank you to all team that come here together, and to Columbia Global Centers in different cities. And thank you in person to everybody. Thank you. Merve, I'm leaving the final words to you.
No, thank you very much for being with us today. It was such an engaging conversation. I hope we had more time to continue because you and I have many, many more questions. So we hope to continue this conversation in the coming months as part of the Emergency Urbanism webinar series. But thank you all for being with us today, and also to our audience. Thank you.